All right, let's get started. Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Advocating for History Education in Contentious Times. I am Dr. Andrew Cooper. I'm the production editor for the Journal of American History. This webinar is made possible by a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. It is being recorded and will be posted on the OAH website early next week. If you would, please use the Q&A box to ask our presenters questions rather than the chat feature. If you need technical assistance, though, an OAH staff member is available in the chat to help you out. The Organization of American Historians is located on the campus of Indiana University, Bloomington. We wish to acknowledge and honor the indigenous communities native to this region and recognize that Indiana University, Bloomington is built on indigenous homelands and resources. We recognize the Miami, Delaware, Potawatomi, and Shawnee people as past, present, and future caretakers of this land. All right, so to our panelists. First up is Kristy Brugar. She's an associate professor of social studies education, instructional leadership and academic curriculum department chair, and the Robert L. and Nan A. Huddleston Presidential Professor of Education at the University of Oklahoma. She also serves as the immediate past chair of the board of directors for the National Council for History Education. Dr. Brugar is a recipient of the University of Oklahoma Janine Rainbow College of Education Research Award in 2020, the National Council for the Social Studies College and University Faculty Assembly Early Career Award in 2017, and the OU Janine Rainbow College of Education Junior Faculty Award also in 2017. Brugar's research focuses on teacher development, social studies/history education, and interdisciplinary instruction involving inquiry, social studies, literacy, and visual arts. Her work has been published in the Journal of Social Studies Education, The History Teacher, the Journal of Teacher Education, and the Social Studies. Brugar teaches undergraduate and graduate courses in elementary and secondary social studies education. Previously, she was a middle school history/social studies teacher in Maryland and Michigan. Welcome. Up next is Dr. Lawrence Paska. He is the executive director of the National Council for the Social Studies. He began his appointment in October of 2016. Dr. Paska began his career as a middle school social studies teacher in New York State public school districts. Most recently, Paska served as the Director of Professional Development for the Southern Westchester Board of Cooperative Education Services, where he and his team provided instructional programs and services for 32 public school districts in the greater New York City region, supported data-driven instruction, developed instructional leadership seminars, and were instrumental in implementing New York State's K-12 social studies framework. Within the NCSS community, Paska served as the 2015-2016 president of the New York State Council for the Social Studies and received NYSCSS's Distinguished Social Studies Service Award in 2017. He also served as the House of Delegates chair for the Resolutions Committee and has been a member of 3 associated groups: the College and University Faculty Assembly, the Council of State Social Studies Specialists, and the National Social Studies Supervisors Association. Dr. Paska has taught social studies education methods at the university level and holds permanent 7 through 12 social studies education and school district administrator certifications in New York State. He earned his BA in history and an MAT in social studies from Union College and a PhD in curriculum and instruction from the University of Albany. Welcome. And finally, Jennifer Warner began her political organizing work during the 2008 presidential primaries as a volunteer. Over the past 14 years, she has led the field operations for numerous statewide and presidential campaigns. In March of 2018, she joined Stand for Children as the vice president of organizing and is now the executive of organizing and campaigns, overseeing the organizing, digital engagement, and communications work across Stand affiliates and national programs. Ms. Warner works with Learn from History Coalition partners to advocate for fact-based, accurate history education. Welcome. All right, so now I would like to ask each of our panelists to provide a brief introduction of their organization. So we'll just go down the line. Let's start with Kristy.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Drew, for that introduction. And it's really a privilege to be here today with my colleagues and with the OAH in general. So again, we're all in sort of Zoom mode here. So again, it's my privilege to join you as the immediate past chair of the National Council for History Education, or NCHE. For the past 30 years, NCHE has been a membership organization which advocates for the teaching and learning of diverse histories through inquiry-based instruction. Our membership consists of elementary and secondary classroom teachers, faculty in university and college settings, as well as staff at museums, historical societies, and other cultural institutions. Generally speaking, history enthusiasts are our people. And in addition to having that national membership, we also work with a network of state affiliates. So the Michigan Council for Social Studies, Oklahoma Council for the Social Studies, et cetera. And as a membership organization, we advocate for history educators and history education through an understanding of history as a discipline, as well as the use of history's habits of mind, which you see displayed here. This means we support our membership in a call for teaching of multiple histories and multiple perspectives, asking good historical questions, engaging in diverse sources of evidence, and recognizing the importance of evolving narratives and changing interpretations of the past based on evidence. And these ideals are evidenced in some of our annual conference programming, the Equity Summit, which I hope we'll have an opportunity to talk with Larry about a little bit as we've partnered with that, professional learning programming that we've done, and our outreach throughout the calendar year.
All right, good. Thank you so much, Kristy. We'll go to Larry.
Thank you again, and hopefully you can hear me okay. Thank you. So I first want to acknowledge that it is both a pleasure and an honor to be with Kristy and Jennifer today. We are a close network in the social studies, humanities, social sciences world. We interact a lot together, we interconnect together. I'm going to talk about that very briefly because ultimately, as Kristy mentioned, she's not only a past award winner with us at NCSS and a chair of a partnering organization, but also has been active in our leadership as awards committee chair and in many other roles. Jennifer working, we serve as a member of the Learn from History Coalition. We'll talk about that in a moment, but I just want everyone to realize today that if you take away nothing else, know that you are not alone when you are building an advocacy message, and you have partners like us who we talk together as well. So it's not the first time we've met, and it won't be the last. And again, I also want to thank the Organization of American Historians for the chance to just come together around this really critical topic. So similar to as Kristy described, NCSS is a professional membership association. We represent K-12 classroom teachers, college and university faculty, school and district supervisors, and state education personnel, all with an interest and passion in social studies education. We also count members from around the world who teach global education or social studies in a local context abroad. And what I'm sharing with you today is what we've doubled down in as a membership association in the past 2 years around advocacy. So as a professional membership association, our first mission always is to be by educators for educators, providing professional development and conferences, webinars, and programs like these, publications, both print and digital. We're here to serve the education needs of our educators. But here's the tricky thing. Advocacy in and of itself is not something that you necessarily put a program on to make a lot of money for, but it's an essential part of what an association does. Because if we have a responsibility to not just train our members, but also raise the voices of our members and raise the voices of our professions. So we've doubled down in the past few years in advocacy, and I want to share just a few quick resources. One is our advocacy toolkit. And I'll be referencing this throughout the questions and discussion period throughout the day, throughout this program. But part of advocacy for us at NCSS is taking positions. I know NCHE will do this as well. Having tools available to help you customize the message that you want to say, because just to say social studies is important, yes, it is. History is important. We all agree. But The way I hear that message may differ depending on who I am. Am I a parent? Am I a member of the public I meet in the supermarket line? Am I a school superintendent or school board member? Am I an elected official? Am I a business owner? So part of our toolkit is about how do you help develop and customize that message depending on the audience you are speaking to. And I think that could be a critical part of what we might take away together today is how do you develop advocacy that resonates with the person you are trying to connect with, and most importantly, build a long-term relationship with around social studies. Meeting with legislators, there are a lot of tricks and tools for that. We've worked with partners over the years on what happens when you take a meeting with an elected or appointed official. How do you engage with them? How do you make that 15-minute interaction or sometimes 30-second interaction in the elevator count? And what are we focused on in social studies in the past year? We've been really doubling down on promoting what is called the Civic Secures Democracy Act. This represents a $5 billion proposed investment in history and civics education nationwide. Now, granted, in the grand scheme of the federal budget, $5 billion is small, but boy, that would be a massive infusion of resources for states, for school districts, for organizations like all of us here and many that you represent. So we encourage you to learn more about this act, find out if your congressional representatives have co-sponsored it, and if not, help encourage them to understand why this is such a critical investment in social studies. Title IV-A dollars, another investment, not about social studies specifically, but about helping with a well-rounded education, of which social studies can be a major part. And so using those dollars to support professional and curriculum development, we really encourage. We also try to work on developing new sources of revenue and encouraging our elected leaders to consider them, such as service learning, such as other acts for civics education. And there are current funding streams that support social studies. The U.S. Department of Education monitors American History and Civics Academies as one example. There is also, as part of the American Rescue Plan from last year, the Emergency Connectivity Fund. What does this have to do with social studies? This is about closing the digital divide and making sure that when kids go home, they have access to high quality broadband, that if they're participating in remote learning, they have access. We just simply can't do history and social studies education without connecting online, even if it's just accessing sources and it's not full-on instruction. Very briefly, as I know Jennifer will talk about the Learn from History Coalition in a moment, part of our strategy in the past few years has been to participate in coalitions. We believe we are stronger together. It's often hard for us as individual membership associations to go it alone in advocacy. So we currently belong to 9 separate coalitions, Learn from History being one of those, National Coalition for History, the Civics Now Coalition. I encourage all of you to get to know these. Many of these are very public facing. Their organization lists are right online. And if you do represent a nonprofit or membership association, very often these coalitions are looking to increase their strength. And what these coalitions do is they help to advocate on Capitol Hill for the importance of history and history education, the importance of civic learning. And by belonging to these coalitions, we have a shared voice that we can also educate our members and our partners around the key issues that we're fighting for. And lastly, I'll just share quickly the themes that we're exploring this year at NCSS. So our vision is that all students are prepared for a world of lifelong inquiry and informed civic action. We want our kids, that the very questions they ask at the youngest ages, we want them to grow up being passionate and see that inquiry is the heart of what we do. It's what defines our common humanity. And it helps us to build bridges, it helps us to grow. And so we want our kids to be ready for a life of inquiry, and we want them to be empowered to do something about those questions they're asking. And so this year at our upcoming annual conference and throughout the year, we're focusing on these themes. If you connect with us, you'll see these as kind of the core of our messaging and the things that we're trying to connect with the general public around. How are educators lifelong learners themselves? How do we foster civil discourse and instruction? How do we embrace teaching hard history? How do we build critical media literacy? And it is Media Literacy Week. And so in celebration of that, we say that media literacy to us is not just a week, it really is part of the Social Studies Foundation year-round. How do we foster the concept that all students really are participating in a global world, that they are citizens of the world? And lastly, and part of this webinar today, how do we navigate the political landscape of social studies so that we can continue to do the effective teaching and learning that we know is good practice and that we've been researching for a long time now. So anyway, thank you again, and I look forward to connecting more with questions soon.
All right, thanks, Larry. Jennifer.
Hi, everyone. So great to be with all of you today. And of course, with Larry and Kristy again, and OAH for hosting this conversation. I am here representing Learn from History. We are a coalition of over 40 organizations representing really a broad cross-section of educators, students, and parents, both from within the K through 12 education advocacy sector, which is where Stand for Children usually lives, but also education membership organizations like these. And we have expanded over the last year and a half as a coalition to include historical societies, groups that are fighting censorship and book banning, librarians and library associations. It continues to grow and morph as really these attacks on accurate history, on what could be taught and read in the classroom, continues to be under attack. As a coalition, one, we are nonpartisan. We don't actually do advocacy as Learn from History. We think it's a really important piece of this work that there are those who maintain and stay in that expert level space where you can talk as experts in teaching history, experts in understanding how censorship has been used over decades in our country to suppress discussion and learning. And be that kind of expert in your community. So we came together really to provide toolkits for people to take immediate steps to address the concerns and the folks who are showing up to school board meetings, showing up to your classroom, to understand how can you meaningfully engage in the conversations. What is it that it's about? And how can we both address concerns that people are bringing that are coming from kind of out of nowhere and really based on misinformation and disinformation, but do so in meaningful ways, in as productive of ways as possible, knowing that we can't just shut our doors and avoid the public and many of you in your day-to-day jobs. So providing those toolkits and those resources. And then we also provide trainings on advocacy and messaging, because you probably decided to become an educator or work in education because you love that, not because you wanted to think that you needed to advocate for what was taught in the classrooms, but that's something that we all have to do and is an important part of being a part of this community. And so having trainings, being able to talk and connect with other people is a really important way of being able to stand up, to make your voice heard when sometimes it can certainly feel and very much be threatening or scary. And so then we also are able to manage a coalition of a cohort of these wonderful organizations to bring together the things that we are learning from not just across professions and sectors, but across the country. It's really a key part of being able to advocate and to understand a misinformation campaign that is happening, to see where there are trends that are happening across the country, where new things are popping up that might be taking hold and will be soon in your communities. And then, of course, to be able to share messaging guidance rooted in polling and research so that we can understand the effective ways of talking about our issues, connecting across difference, and then hopefully being able to stay up on what has really turned out to be a very ever-changing and moving landscape. So we hope to be a place of resource, of connection and community building as we take on this very important issue.
All right, Jennifer, thank you. So now we're going to open it up to Q&A for those of you in attendance. Again, if you would, please use the Q&A feature down at the bottom. While we're getting questions lined up, I have one for the three of you. OAH members are interested in how they can be strong advocates at the local and state level. What steps do you recommend for someone who's just starting out?
I can begin if no one else wants to, I suppose. I'm going to go back to something that we talked about earlier, which is, I think, honing in what is the question you're really trying to solve and the audience you're trying to solve it with. So obviously, history is important. History is vital as a foundation of teaching and learning. Yes, that's a very big, broad statement. And so is there something specific that you're trying to ask for, and then who are you asking it of? So one example is for us in social studies, we've been tracking for 20 years plus the marginalization and elimination of social studies at the elementary level. So one of the things we've done, and I'll put it in the chat box after talking, we're taking guidance from the Council of Chief State School Officers on specific requests that we can make to shine light on how social studies has been eliminated in elementary. And we put forth a request that we want to see social studies taught for 45 minutes every day, K through 6. That's, again, a concrete, specific request. It's grounded in, if you say this to someone, social studies is not at the elementary level, we want to see 45 minutes a day in every class. That opens up the conversation to, is it not being taught for 45 minutes a day? What would it look like? How is it being taught? What would it take to do that? But it anchors it in a number, it anchors it in something concrete that you can put your mind to. And when you think of a school day as 6.5 hours, 7 hours at the elementary level, again, you can wrap your mind around what a time in a day looks like that includes social studies, better than just to say it's not being taught and it needs to be. So I might encourage people to think about a specific request, anchor it in some kind of number or data, and then have it be relatable. If you're talking to an elementary parent, that's a great opportunity to talk about elementary and the social studies. If you're talking with parents who have college-age kids, it may not resonate as much, but you may want to talk about how strong are history majors in your college? How many, do you have a viable history program? So again, anchoring it back in, where is the person coming from that you're talking to, and how can you make history the entry point somehow based on their experience?
As an extension to what you're saying, Larry, I couldn't agree with you more. I'm thinking about, and Jennifer, I think you started to highlight this, that as leaders in our fields and in our communities, I think it behooves us to be learners in our fields and in our communities. And so how are we being open to hearing the stories, the experiences, the questions that our constituencies, whoever they may be, whether it's membership, whether it's the teachers in our communities, et cetera, how are they really, what are they grappling with, and how can we be responsive to those issues? We may see things from a national perspective or a 30,000-foot view, but really in our communities, the teacher down the street, what are the things that they're thinking about, are on their mind, and where is our expertise able to link and work in? So as part of NCHE, one of the things that we've done and continue to lean on is a teacher advocacy or a teacher advisory group. So we have representative elementary, secondary teachers from across the country who apply and become TAG members, teacher advocacy group, or sorry, I keep saying advocacy, advisory group members, to serve as sort of those informants in various communities and in the field, so that we're not just responsive to what we see issues to be from our perspectives, but really from those who are doing the hard work every day, who, Larry, to your point, are navigating that less than 45 minutes a day of elementary social studies or history. And how can we then, with our expertise, help to address that issue, not an issue that we perceive there to be?
Yeah, and then I would just round out thinking about the ways in which what kind of skills and relationships you bring from your personal, professional perspective, as well as remembering that you are and we are always citizens of this country, and how you're participating and lending your voices in that way as well. And they can work hand in hand. Right now, one of the biggest things that we hear from, whether it is our parents that we're working with at Stand for Children, or certainly things that are coming out of polling research, trying to understand how parents are feeling about what's happening in classrooms, what's being taught in classrooms. The number one thing is making sure that everyone understands the value of history being taught in classrooms, of social studies being taught in classrooms. The number one thing that really brings people together around a shared value is that the ways in which these classes in particular help to build rigor and critical thinking and leadership development skills of our students, which is something that we actually can see across partisanship, age, demographics, geography, really brings people together that they can agree on. And so being able to, really explain that, and I know it might seem like, do I need to explain that? But we're all people and we need like things broken down in very simple terms and not, make assumptions. So being able to talk about how you navigate those kinds of conversations in your classrooms and the ways that helps to prepare our students for not just, handling the world as it is today, but to have the skills that are going to bring all of us into the world we're going to need to navigate in the future. And that's something that's really important. And I think your voices help to bring real trust in that space where, again, we're seeing a disinformation and a misinformation campaign about this issue in particular, but it's showing up in a lot of our issues currently that we are struggling with in our society. And so that means that people more and more lean on their already trusted networks of family, friends, trusted folks in the community. And so I think that's something that we can all really lean into and know that one conversation, a handful of conversations, if we're all doing that, really does make a difference and is going to be just as impactful as, any kind of big gesture you might think about in terms of advocacy.
All right, just to follow up a little bit on that, I like where this sort of conversation is going. I can imagine with all of the various state bills that are going through right now that are under consideration that, individual teachers might feel like they're sort of caught in the crossfire here, right? But what you're talking about really is really working within communities. So I wonder what resources are out there for both teachers, parents, what have you, that want to really do this type of work from the community sort of base grassroots level.
I'll jump in real quick so Larry doesn't have to feel like he has to go first this time again. And I'll just throw in the chat, and I think will be included in the notes afterwards. Larry mentioned a toolkit that they have for advocacy. We also have one on Learn from History. I think these are really great ways and resources that kind of taken from different areas, different organizations, really can help to kind of break down what are kind of the first steps that one might take when thinking about advocacy, particularly as it relates to whether it's school board policies, state legislative policies, how to begin those conversations. And so I'll throw that in the chat. I think that's a really great place to start understanding, who those decision makers are in your community, where those decisions are getting made. And then just, again, just going to a meeting, listening, talking, having meetings with your elected representatives are always things that as citizens we have a right to do and should be doing more of.
I agree with you, Jennifer. I think that idea of knowing what's actually on the docket. What are these pieces that are coming up for legislative decisions becomes a really great first step in getting us, our teachers, our local community, understanding really what's in front of them. Because too often I think we're responding to something that's already occurred, as opposed to what is in the mix that we as citizens within our community have an active opportunity to impact prior to having to react to or respond to it. So taking those opportunities, and I know NCSS does a phenomenal job with those advocacy trainings and those opportunities to be on the Hill, to thinking about how do we begin to have those conversations that are short, to the point, and that communicate not just a message of me as an individual citizen, but as a representative educator within a community, as a representative of a national organization, and all of those varied identities that each one of our teachers and our members bring is vitally important to how I think we make change within our community and really create those schools and history experiences that our children deserve.
So I want to also suggest, if you have time, if you are at a barbecue or maybe a more formal event, I don't know, depending where you are, but if you have some time and you're with, and again, this is also reading the audience you're with, but if you're with people that seem open and engaged to what you do for a living or your interest in history, start with the question of, hey, what are some questions you've heard kids ask in school or ask in their community? It doesn't have to be if you're with a parent group, it may be with their own kids. If it's with other educators or others interested in education, it could be just kids in their school, whatever. But I always love to start kind of cocktail party conversation with this. What are kids talking about these days? when you get that conversation out there, the punchline for you is always, seems like our kids are really interested in history, because it never fails. Our kids are constantly asking about why things are the way they are, how they got there, what they can do about it. And sometimes it can be a really deep, complex question about presidential history. Sometimes it's about the way we've used land over time. Doing a land acknowledgement, that's just now, that's getting me thinking about, so who really did live here before? What was their relationship to the land? What does that mean to me? Kids innately ask questions about history. They are innately curious about the past and what it means for their future, what they do about that knowledge. Start there. Again, sometimes, again, read the room, know who you're with, but sometimes if you're in a setting where you have that moment to let people know why history is so vital, why social education is so vital, use that moment. Now, if you only have 10 seconds and you're in the elevator with a governor or elected leader, you don't have time to play that kind of game, but you might comment on something or open the door to something about education and what it means. Or, I've been in elevators before. I love to wear social studies themed ties. I've been in elevators and places before with people who have like a historical tie on or something. And I may comment and say, oh, you're a history buff too, aren't you? And suddenly you just you're disarmed together and you share that moment. And that could be the doorway into. Now, again, this is little a advocacy. This isn't big A advocacy. The big A advocacy can often be harder. And again, that's why we really embrace the coalition model. For the big A, what I would recommend, I just want to single out, Learn from History has some tools that we really like, which is, basically, if you're a school board member, if you're a school administrator, a parent, here's what you need to know about history in the classroom. NCHE with History's Habits of Mind. Again, another way to think about how you frame instruction on history. Here's the hard part for the big A of advocacy is a lot of times as educators, we're nervous about making statements or trying to push, even our membership in associations. We are making statements because we're trying to not just defend what we know to be good, well-tested, time-honored research and, pedagogy in our fields. We're also trying to help the world understand that what we do has not changed. If it's anything, it's changed for the better, but what we do, we're basing our practice off of time-honored, centuries-long research and theory, but we also have to give ourselves cover. So we issue things like a code of ethics for the social studies profession. We've issued position statements recently that address issues like what academic freedom means in a social studies context, what the rights and responsibilities of teachers are. We put these out there, again, for big A advocacy as sort of a blanket cover. Use these words, use the words of associations like ours to help you in your local context. But remind, and sometimes we have to just remind people that as an educator, you are a licensed professional. You have, you essentially are guided by ethical practice, because working with children, working with those who are learning, no matter what age you're working with, there's an ethical dimension to our practice. And again, this is the big A of advocacy, but it may bear repeating. Just use those words, use the language of our associations and organizations to help you, because we want to provide you that kind of cover to say, this is developed by professionals like me all over the country and world who care just about what you care about. They just put words to it, and here they are.
And I think that's such a strong and important role or action that we, as our 3 organizations, 4 organizations, the organizations represented here in the Zoom room, can do, is provide those words, those snapshots, the position statements. NCHE had a statement about teaching in contentious times in 2020 as a point of reference for our teachers, our constituencies, as they navigate these varied spaces. Maybe that becomes part of what they've got on their phone, Larry, right, when they go to the barbecue and are ready to give a couple of those points. But in lieu of Jennifer sitting next to someone as they go to their school board meeting, have we given them quick, concise, and powerful? And I loved the word that you used, ethical, there, because really, as we think about ourselves as educators, there is that code of ethics, right? That should navigate the work that we do as professionals. And too often that has been butted up against in terms of who is and who can be a teacher in the United States today. So really continuing to forward that professionalism with that evidence that helps them navigate all of the things they expected and didn't expect to have to do in any given day. And Learn from History is a fantastic place where we have lots of those touch points, right, Jennifer?
Yeah, I think it's so important, just in advocacy and organizing in general, to always ask yourself who's not represented in whatever your circle is, because there is a voice, there is a framework that helps to just make the organizing and the advocacy that much more powerful. It's why I think our coalitions, especially around these topics, have been so successful, despite what you might or might not be hearing about in the news, have been successful because it is covering lots of different sectors and touch points of our community, which of course it should, because education is the foundation of all of those different things. So bringing all those different voices not only ensures that you are able to speak across lots of different audiences, but also when you're doing your big A advocacy, that you likely have someone in your group or in that organization who has a relationship or has a point of view that will be important, will be heard by those elected officials, even if it's not you or your particular organization. But being and advocating for similar things, for those shared values, is what's going to make us successful in continuing to ensure the rigor in our kids' education that we know they need and deserve.
All right. So another question for you, as someone who's wanting to get into this advocacy, what types of challenges should one anticipate when advocating for inclusive history instruction?
Oh, Jennifer, I think you go first this time, right? No.
You go for it.
This is that strange, awkward wait time, right, that we had as middle school teachers in different ways.
I'm happy to start just by offering this, and I think we touched on this earlier, is think about something that's going to resonate like right away. And maybe it's not hyper political, but it's just something that's on your mind. And I go back again, I'm a proud parent of elementary age kids. So what's on my mind right now is, how are my girls learning history? How are they learning civics? How, we live close to the Washington, D.C. area. How are they kind of getting a sense of, there's federal and there's state and there's local. And then even within local, there's county and there's town and there's city. And how are they immersed in all this? And what kinds of questions are they asking me? And sometimes advocacy can just be something as simple as connecting with other parents, if you're part of parents groups, or if you are part of specific civics organizations. Maybe if you're like, I'm just going to throw examples out. Maybe you're part of different athletic groups, so you're taking your kids to different athletic meets, and those are organizations, but those are parents that care very much too about education. And you may not be talking about history or social studies right at that moment, but finding out, how are kids doing in school? What are things they're asking about? Hey, my kids are asking about the same thing too. Hey, do you know how history is going in your school? What kinds of opportunities do they have? It kind of starts there and it can build. And so, I don't mean to bring it back to that little A all the time, but that really often is the best place we can start. Now, if you're already there, or you really want to do the big A, and you're in a position where op-eds are possible, or maybe you are in the leadership of a local organization, especially if you are leading in, let's say a nonprofit in your community or something, and you want to draw attention to history and social studies education through that means, maybe we need to speak out in support of educators more. Again, make sure it's aligned to your mission, make sure you're not going against that mission in whatever capacity you're in, but taking a moment to stand in support of social studies, of history, of education, and writing about it or sharing it that way is really important. I think, and to Jennifer's point earlier, despite a lot of the polarization that's happening right now and a lot of the frustration and anxiety, the good news, and I do count it as good news, is that history is in the news, that we are talking about history. We're trying to define what is a common history. How do we reinterpret that history? How do we create an inclusive history that is open to all and that has all voices represented in a way that really shows the fabric of what historical thinking is all about, and how we keep building that future together. That's not aspirational or Pollyannish. That's real. That's real now. And so the good news is it is all on our minds. And I guess that's why, to me, when you start with the little a, you could get to the big A pretty quickly, because I think a lot of us, even those of us have nothing to do with history or education in our day jobs. You know, we're engineers, we're doing other things. We may be struggling to work. We're hearing it, we understand it, we just don't know where to go, and we don't know who to talk to, and we may not realize the person standing next to me is a history professor who's leading national organizations, or is an advocate of a nonprofit. They may not know this, and by meeting you and understanding your passion for the work you're doing, they may suddenly say, let me be an ambassador for the subject with you, let me be an ambassador for history with you now.
I would add to that Andrew, to your question, you know, I think one of the things that happens that we might anticipate or think about is, in many people's mind, history is this sort of benign subject matter, right? It's a list of dates, and in some people's experience, it was taught by the football coach, and there were a series of films, and I'm bringing up all of sort of that rhetoric. And so when we start to talk about the histories that each one of us has talked about today, it's a different history than some people have experienced, that may be the person on the soccer field that we're chatting with, or at the barbecue, or whatever the case might be. So we have to remember that we all come with these variety of experiences and understandings, and that in many ways, when we're thinking about our classroom teachers, they're not just teaching a diverse history to the children that are in their classrooms, they're potentially teaching those histories to the children in their classrooms, their families, and their extended families. And that's a different kind of way of thinking about sort of that network and that power of voice and perspective. And so really helping to prepare those individuals to think about, you know, what does it mean to teach something differently or present it in a way that hadn't been presented before? Because sometimes that becomes the rub, and to just be able to really say, here's the rationale, the inclusive nature of this, the ways in which the rigor, as Jennifer used that word earlier, is really going to connect your students as citizens, and potentially you as a citizen of our community, in much richer and deeper ways. And I think with that also, with that same sort of idea in mind, each person that we talk to about history and history education and the advocacy towards a more inclusive history that's being taught, we're talking to not just that individual, but the 10 individuals that they might be in contact with, and then 5 more individuals. And so really the power of speaking out and speaking about not just what we're teaching, but why we're teaching these things and for what purpose becomes a really important part of that messaging that goes out, that's within the first 3 sentences, I think.
Yeah, I would just offer some additional perspectives on the challenges that we have with advocacy, especially in this environment right now, is that it can feel as though there are only, or every voice is the voice saying, you know, we need to do and take whatever kind of extreme measures. And so you can feel as if, oh my gosh, am I the only person here who does not seeing it this way? And so a challenge we always have with advocacy is that it's those on the margins, or who have that like really strong reaction, who are going to be the loudest, even though they do not necessarily represent what is the majority. And that's certainly what our polling finds and has found over a year and a half into this. But that's a challenge, is for all of us individually to say, you know what, I'm going to be the one who speaks up, even when it feels as if no one else is with me. But I guarantee you that every time we do stand up in that, you know, feeling like we're the only ones, that is the invitation for others to say, oh my gosh, I was feeling the same way. I just thought maybe I was the only one. So that's a challenge that we can have as individuals. Systemically, the challenge with advocacy is always, it's never happening as fast as we think or want. We often are taking some steps forward along with some steps back or sideways, and it's never a straight line. And so, particularly coming from an education advocacy organization, it is about a lifetime of continuous pushing and moving us to do and be better, knowing that when we reach what I thought was better will be the time that we can see a new vision of what is better. So it's never ending. And I think it's important for us to be okay with that. We're always wanting to improve. That's the value and I think the beauty of the system we have here, that we can always be improving, we can always be building and growing. And so not to think about advocacy as I'm trying to get from point A to point B only. And if I don't get there, it's not successful, because that is really, I think, the enemy of advocacy. That's when you start to think there's nothing I can do. It's not worth it. It's not making a difference. And that's when we get into real trouble. So we need those two working hand in hand.
All right, well, thank you. So we've got maybe about 10 more minutes left. This is the last call for questions from the attendees. If you've got any questions, please put them in the Q&A feature down at the bottom. I'll give you just a couple of minutes for that. While we're waiting, do you guys have any final thoughts you want to wrap up with here while we're waiting for additional questions?
Can I ask a question of my colleagues?
Certainly.
So I'm wondering how we think about and balance the advocacy for a collective good and sort of individual protections, because I think that's often how people navigate or have hesitancy as they begin to foray into this realm. And so I think that would be a really nice thing for us to maybe chat about for a couple of minutes, that balance, especially with teachers, as I'm thinking about teachers as being those both public entities and private citizens, and really sometimes having to navigate two very different personas.
Well, I will just say, as someone who's a nerd when it comes to political science and organizing, this is the challenge of our society, right? So if we aren't constantly in tension around those things, of course, in healthy and better ways than we are right now, like that is, I think, kind of what we get to do, and why it's so important for us to have strong civics education and social studies in history, to understand and learn from what has come before, so that we can be better and stronger moving forward, but know that we're always going to have those kinds of tensions. But that said, I think, again, it's why organizing has then become a product of the society that we have structured, knowing that there are times when that collective power is what we need in order to be able to step out into, and say, and be a part of that change, because doing so individually can be detrimental. And, the case of teachers, we're talking about your livelihood, your profession. That's a scary and terrifying thing to go and kind of walk out on your own in. And so just why it's so important for us to have those communities and resources that people know that they're not alone. And then I think it is really building on those relationships that we have, whether they're professional relationships, our family and friend relationships, to be able to understand and to talk about what what it means, again, to have education, to have history education showing up in the way that it does in classrooms, but also reminding people that we do balance right now education and parents' rights. Parents have the right to opt out. What we're contesting in this particular space is that we have certain individual parents who want something and then want that applied across the board. That's the tensions that we're always trying to work within.
I really love what you said earlier, this kind of bridging between the little a, big A, and I'm thinking about starting with where you are and who you know. And so if you're in a position where advocating in a big way could be, could cost you your job, or it could put you in crosshairs in ways that you're not prepared for, that's okay. It's okay that you don't. What you could do is find, what are the, who do I know? What are the things I feel comfortable talking about, or I feel expert on sharing, or, every time I get together with a certain group, we always seem to be talking about this. Maybe this time I'm going to just shift the conversation to history and see where that goes. That's okay. Start with who you know, where you are. If you're in a position where op-eds to the New York Times, you're on speed dial with the executive editor there, and use that moment, by all means, please do that. If you're in a position where you could inform someone that wants to do the big A on your behalf, associations like all of ours, we depend on that local context. We need to know what's happening in your classrooms. What are your kids thinking and feeling? When tragedy happens nationwide, we often see students getting together and being very active civically, but there's a lot that goes into that. They didn't just decide to stand up and address injustice because no one else would. They've learned a history, or they've also learned how to apply history in a contemporary context. That's real for them. So help us, help us as associations, as larger nonprofits, with your stories, that even if you can't share them, or you're not ready to yet or comfortable, help us to share them on your behalf. We redact names and things like that, but we're very happy to understand the local context that you're in, that your kids are in. That helps us to be able to put things out like statements around ethical practice, statements around the importance of First Amendment protections for educators and kids, the importance of social education and historical thinking as a grounding in schools. So again, just find that comfort spot. I know that's a much larger, deeper training. That's probably a week-long seminar on how to do this, but we exist to kind of help with the big A, but we want to nurture the little A. And I would say if you're in a position to do big A, please use our language, use our words and ideas and make them shine. But the little A is so vital. And I think to both your points, we're so enmeshed in talking about this right now as a society that this is the opportunity for us to focus on what good history learning really is about. Because people, you're right, Jennifer, they've got in their mind right now, but things are all wrong, they're all bad, we need to fix them now. There could very well be moments where things aren't what we want them to be, but that's not universal. What is universal is that history is vital. And that, I think, is what we're hearing happen right now. And I don't mean to lead with just the positive, but boy, if we did lead with this positive a lot more, I think we would suddenly find, I need history. This is critical. We've got to make sure this is in our school.
I think that's a great point, Larry, that idea that we've got to make sure this is in our school, that we want to be that part of that conversation that is moving kids towards more critical histories that are not just a series of names and dates, but really a deep understanding of who we have been, are, and will be as a nation and as a world, as a citizenry. And I think when we put the power into what is possible with a good history education, with a strong history education, it changes the tenor of a conversation. We can be at different points in a political spectrum, but the idea of thinking about a world tomorrow that's been informed by that, I think, can be a really good middle ground, particularly when we talk about it in the lives of children, right? And what is better for children.
All right, so we're coming to a close here. Any final thoughts?
I would just say thank you again for the opportunity, and Jennifer and Larry, to be in conversation with the two of you. It's been a pleasure. I would advocate, little a, that if as issues emerge in classrooms, school communities, in states, linking with our national organizations, the national affiliations that teachers and community members have, are vital in making that, I think, to Jennifer's point, more systemic change. We can have little changes, but the systemic changes, I think, the direction that we all advocate and would like to move towards.
Echo what you said, Kristy. I would also thank all of you who are either watching this live, or if you're watching this as a recording. Obviously, advocacy is important to you, and thank you for that. And again, please note, in the spirit of partnership, that between OAH, NCHE, Learn from History, ourselves, Learn from History, you need an acronym that we can use, I guess, right? But all of us, we are together. We are trying to work together, and we do depend on you. So please, if you're watching this and you're saying, I do want to get to know these organizations better, let me see how they interconnect. Let me see what I can offer or share either your time, your talents, your words, something. All of us, we have publications, we have ways that we want to connect with you. Even if you're sharing local context anonymously, we need to know really what's happening in classrooms and how the power of what you're doing every day does make a profound difference for our kids and for our system. So just know we're all together. We are all together in this, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with you for sure.
And I also just want to throw in my thanks for this wonderful conversation. So grateful to be a part of it. And just to remind everyone that no matter how big or small, how much time or resource or bandwidth or mental health you have, whatever you can add to this is hugely beneficial. Do not underrate it. We need everyone to be a part of this and to, whether it is comforting your colleagues, that's a huge part of being able to keep this going. So thank you for what you are doing, have been doing, will continue to do.
All right. So just a reminder that this webinar will be posted on the OAH's website probably early next week. It will have all of the links that our panelists have provided. And for those of you that attended today, you will receive a link to it as well once it's available on the website. I do want to take a moment to thank you guys, Jennifer, Lawrence, and Kristy. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you for those that have attended with us today. It's been a great discussion. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.